Today on History X, we're going to talk with World War II veteran Robert Coulson about his service aboard an amphibious landing ship known as an LST. He's going to tell us what it was like to beach their ship at flank speed, what their secret mission was all about, and finally, what it was like landing on the shores of Japan. This Veteran Spotlight was made possible by members of the History X YouTube channel. To support veteran interviews like this one, be sure to click the join button below. The landing ship tank, simply known as the LST, was developed during World War II to support amphibious attacks in the Pacific and European theaters. These ships would carry tanks, vehicles, cargo, and troops directly onto almost any beach or shore without the benefit of docks or piers. The LST had a highly specialized design that enabled ocean crossings one day and shore groundings the next. Its flat keel allowed the ship to be beached while staying upright. The twin propellers and rudders had protection from grounding, and finally, the bow had a set of large doors that could open, deploy a ramp, and unload vehicles. But if we're just meeting for the first time, my name is Ken Stano, and I am a World War II historian and mechanical engineer. Over 1,000 LSTs were built in the United States during World War II. Now, only a few remain. Just as rare are the World War II veterans that served aboard these unique ships, but I was fortunate to talk with one of them. With the help of History X subscriber Austin Coulson, who also has his own intriguing YouTube channel, I was able to connect with his grandfather, World War II veteran Robert Coulson, who served in the Pacific as the Yeoman aboard LST 1063. As you'll soon see, it was a fascinating discussion that exposes us to the inner workings of these amazing ships. Bob not only discusses the complexities of a beach landing, he also talks about how the LST 1063 actually landed on the shores of Japan at the end of World War II. But if that isn't fascinating enough, the 1063 was then sent on a mission to locate and repatriate a lost Japanese Army battalion that never received the news the war had ended. Finally, Bob Coulson, with the help of fellow crew members, discuss a secret cargo placed aboard LST 1063 that, to this day, remains a mystery. The whole thing is mind-blowing. All right. Bob, can you hear me?
I can, barely. I'm a lip reader too, and you have good lips.
Do I? All right. I have to say that's a first. I've never been told that before. It's a privilege to be talking to you. So I have a whole bunch of questions for you.
Good.
You were a yeoman on an LST.
Correct. But LST stands for Landing Ship Tank, meaning that it carries up to 20 General Sherman tanks. The 1063 was being built in Quincy, Massachusetts by Bethlehem Hingham Shipbuilding. And it was commissioned on March 8, 1945. The complement was 100 enlisted men and 9 officers. And that was our home for the next 13 months. I'm the only survivor for that ship. I had training in Newport News, Virginia. And also Class A Yeoman School in San Diego. I do remember in boot camp, we were dry land sailors. I was born in Colorado and I had seen the ocean. They said, if you guys don't shape up, we're going to send you to the amphibious forces. Well, that meant that's the bottom half of the class would go to the amphibs. Well, that's what an LST was. So you know where I graduated. Now, are there any other questions? When I was in high school, my mother always told me, be sure and learn how to type. Well, I got to 60 words a minute on an old Royal manual typewriter without any errors. The storekeeper and I both shared a very tiny office. I think it was 5 by 7, and we each had our own little desk and typewriters. My job was to type the reports that were required by the Navy Department on a regular basis of how many people came on board, how many left, what their advancement in rating was, and the depth of the ocean. So if it was 7 fathoms, I had to type that up and send it to Washington, D.C. Now, I don't know what they did with that, because that didn't make any difference to any of us. Now, that was my Yeoman job. Then when we had general quarters, then we had a different job. So I immediately changed jobs. I put on a big metal helmet that would accommodate some huge earpieces. And I would go up on the conning deck, which is at the highest part of the ship. And the captain would be there and he would give an order like all ahead flank. I would shout that down to the engine room. They would ring it up on a bell and they would confirm it. And I would repeat those words to Captain Mullins, who just stood idly by with a smile on his face and a cigarette in his hand. Captain Mullins was a full lieutenant and had an impressive education and was all business. And he knew what he was doing and he was the best captain we ever had. Later on, we had another captain who wasn't quite as the same skill level of beaching an LST, who had no experience, and it was very awkward for me to relay messages that were not consistent with a good landing. And it was a tense job to be respectful and to obey his command, even though some of them are incorrect. You just keep saluting and say, yes, sir, and hope for everything to cease so you can get back home to civilian life. LSTs were not supposed to be beautiful, sleek fighting craft like destroyers and aircraft carriers. We were the ugly duckling. When our LST was completed in Quincy, Massachusetts, we saw her for the first time. It was an interesting vessel, and I, for one, found it intriguing. To be on board on top where you could see everything. And have Captain Mullins say, all ahead flank. Engines were full ahead flank. When those things were revved up, boy, you couldn't even hear yourself talk. And we dropped the stern anchor. And you rammed the beach as fast as you could. You could only beach at high tide when the water was at the very highest. And then the minute you got up on the beach, you shifted all the ballast in the lower tanks of seawater, and you shifted those forward so the bow of the ship would rest heavily on the sand and hold it there, and then let the tide go out slowly. Then we were on the beach for probably 48 hours. Sometimes it would be trucks. Sometimes it would be up to 20 General Sherman tanks. Then we had to reverse that by taking the stern anchor and tightening the anchor and do a reverse shift of the ballast so that its nose would get lighter. We would then put the engines in full reverse and hopefully you'd slip off the beach. And it didn't always work that nice, but Captain Mullen knew how to do that. And he knew every command, and I knew every command along with him. So if he fell over dead, I would be able to take it up. Our very first cargo, when we left Quincy, Massachusetts, we sailed down to Key West, and at Key West, we got orders to take on some secret munitions.
The captain said, "Oh, who's going to be the commodore of the convoy?" He says, "You are." I said, "I'm just a lieutenant. How come?" He says, "You're going by yourself. The cargo you're carrying would be too dangerous to go in a convoy. If you were hit, the whole convoy would go up." And so we went down the eastern seaboard to Panama.
We took them through the canal and over to Pearl Harbor.
Then Pearl Harbor, where we got rid of this ammunition, whatever it was, these explosives.
I don't know what happened to them then because they were transferred to another ship. And we never really knew what those munitions were, but they were timed prior to the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, maybe some of the supplies that belonged to those bombs. Underway, sometimes it would be hot. We didn't have air conditioning on the ship. We had a blower that blew air. And we would like to be swimming in the ocean, but we were underway and we're in this beautiful water, and it's in the Pacific. On the top deck, a person could crawl through and go down there and get on the ladder. Between the ramp and the bow doors, there is a small crawl space of about 3 or 4 feet. And on each door, there is a welded ladder that goes down, and hold on to those ladders while the bow was going up and down, plunging through the water. And boy, that was the best bath you ever had. We were sort of like a truck driver. Whatever was needed here, whatever's there, we just crisscrossed the Pacific through the canal, Pearl Harbor. The war was still going on heavily in Okinawa at that time. And we got in there just after that was secured. But we were in and out of Okinawa, in and out of Japan, Ponape Island, Enewetak, Saipan, Guam, Marianas, Korea. Now, each place was a little different. We never knew where we were going, and we weren't supposed to tell anybody where we were and all that. We just kept trucking until the war was over. After the Japanese surrendered, we repatriated some of the Japanese army and we'd take them back to the homeland. What was really interesting, remember the war had ended maybe a month before, and they were on an island on Enewetak and Ponape. And of course, Ponape is just a little tiny island. There's no communication. Our Air Force had bombed out the airstrip that the Japanese had built. So here were these Army personnel living on an island, and they did not know the war was over. We had pulled in there to pick them up and take them home, and they looked at us like, "Are you crazy? Is this some kind of a trick?" So back then there was a magazine, Time or Look, I've forgotten the magazine name, but we had one of those on board, and it showed General MacArthur signing the peace agreement on the Missouri. And we had to show them that, even though we couldn't talk to them. And finally they caught on, and then they started grinning. They were so happy because we were feeding them and taking them home. When the war ended, the whole world changed that instant. We went into Tokyo Bay, and we dropped a ramp down, opened the bow doors, and I didn't see any military officers, but there were civilian men and women who came up with their eyes like saucers looking at us. And they came up, and some of our guys offered them a cigarette. They'd take one and smile. And of course, you couldn't talk to them. The Japanese people seemed to be cautious, but they were open-minded and trying to communicate. They were hungry people. They were defeated, but they were also humble, and they weren't the monsters that we had been trained that we were supposed to eradicate a few months before.
The LST was definitely the workhorse for the Allied naval forces. Plus, it was a thrill for me to talk with Robert Coulson, a surviving veteran from World War II. And of course, his stories don't end there. He also shares memories of corresponding with a USO girl, and even how one of his buddies aboard ship received a Dear John letter. All of those stories, plus my full-length interview with Bob, are available to you when you become a History X YouTube channel member. Simply click on the join button below. Finally, this amazing opportunity to talk with World War II veteran Robert Coulson could not have been possible without his grandson and History X subscriber, Austin Coulson. Be sure to visit his YouTube channel. My name is Ken Stano. Thank you for checking out History X.